Welcome, friends.
Hey.
Hope you're having a good week at this point. Um, yeah, we're just back in it, and this week we're doing Nebraska, so I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, I was also thinking it's kind of weird because we have actually stayed ahead so far,
Yeah.
which also kind of behind because technical issues. So, and this is funny because this will be the third episode you guys are listening to in the new year, but for us, it wasn't that long ago that we had planned on having our episode out on the 15th, and we were good to go. We had episodes recorded, but like the site we used to do our recording, we had issues with, and then it took forever to get the help we needed, and then it just put us behind. So that's where we kind of
Yeah, so sorry for the
delayed.
delay there.
Yeah, but we're still here. We should be hopefully steady for a little bit, but even despite that, Shannon and I just have to brag on us because we've stayed
Yeah,
ahead. We're keeping ahead. So go us. But then it's kind of weird because I'm so used to us recording like the day before it's going
right,
to come out. So like it's more like talking about what's currently happening. And now
right.
if we do, it's like, yeah, it'll be a few
We're
weeks
off.
later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's off because what we talk about now and predict might happen, and you just don't know because by the time it comes out, so.
Yeah,
We
it's
don't,
it's
I mean,
so
and
hard
there's
to say.
nothing really exciting going on anyways. But yeah, as of now, we're ahead of the game. So I'm happy
Yeah.
with that. But
Knock on wood, we can maintain that. I will say it is stupidly nice outside today.
yeah, I will gladly take it. If the wind wasn't blowing like at all, this would feel like spring. And
Oh, have you been outside recently? Because it was still springtime. I didn't even wear my
yeah,
jacket. I was just wearing a t-shirt out to my car
yeah,
when I left work.
it was windy when I was out there last. I mean, and I was like, okay, it was fine in like a hoodie. But I was like, if it, I mean, I would love just no wind because I hate wind anyway. But yeah,
Yeah,
so it's good. It's super nice, but I know it's Nebraska, so it's still bound to snow.
I know it's the last week of January and it is almost 60 degrees outside, so I'm just expecting a blizzard here in the next week
I
or so
know,
then.
which is funny because a week ago, kids were out of school because of it being like so cold.
So
So it's like
cold.
you just don't know what to expect here, but that's how we roll.
You gotta love it. You gotta love
Yeah,
it.
for sure. So Nebraska, that's that. And on that note, I'm doing a Nebraska case today. And I do
Yeah.
have to say, I changed cases 3 times because I couldn't decide which one I wanted to do. And then I thought, you know what? It's not like they're going anywhere and we have
Yeah.
plenty of Nebraska ones. So I was like, I'll just do those other ones a different time. And
There
then
you
I
go.
finally picked one and went with it. So I just was all over the place. But this one today, this is going to be back from like the early 2000s. So you'll be familiar with it, I'm sure, Cassie, as I
Okay.
was. But it's kind of one of those good like refreshers. And I'm
Yeah.
sure some people don't know this case. So we'll just go ahead and get going on that if you're ready to hear all the things.
Yeah, I am. I'm ready to hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, we're going to be in Kearney, Nebraska
Okay.
this time around. So we are in 2001, and on April 6th, 17-year-old Anne Sluti was leaving the Hilltop Mall in Kearney, Nebraska around 7 o'clock that night. It's still light outside by then because we've done the whole daylight savings thing. So, by 7 in April, it's like, I mean, it's light out. Like even now, by
Yeah.
the way, I would like to add, I'm very happy that every day it's like a little bit brighter at night because I hate when
Yes.
it's dark at like 5 p.m.
Yeah, same.
The fact that it was light outside is kind of relevant too, just because it makes this case that much crazier. So she's walking to her car. As she gets close to her car, she's approached by a man who points a gun at her and he tells her to get into his car, which is a big blue Suburban. It was parked right next to her car, and she didn't really have time to fight too much because it all happened so quickly. So he grabs her, he throws her in through the driver's side of his car. She's smart. I mean, she slides across as fast as she can, jumps out the passenger side, but he comes around and grabs her and he proceeds to hit her several times just with his fists. And she's screaming at this point. And he's pushing her back into the Suburban while she was screaming the words help specifically, which side note too, I read a thing the other day that said if you need help, don't yell help, yell mom, because they said how moms naturally, anytime you hear the word mom,
I
every
look.
woman turns and looks. Yeah, like that's a
I've
mom. So
also heard that if you yell fire, you'll get a
yeah,
better response than yelling for help. So I'm like,
yeah,
how fucked up
crazy.
is it that you can't yell for help?
I know. I know, that's sad, which, I mean, and I'm sure, like, when we talk about breaking it down in detail how it happened, like, I'm sure in that moment it all happened so fast that, like, because, I think you think, like, "Oh, why wouldn't you have ran towards the store? Why this and that?" And it's
Well,
like, well, it
yeah.
all just happened so freaking
Yeah, the
fast,
fact that
so
she had the presence of mind to try to slide across and
right.
go out the
I
passenger
know. Like, I
side,
wouldn't
like,
have I mean, in the moment, maybe I would have thought of that, but, like, and
it's
who
hard to
knows, like,
say.
I feel like at this point too, even if they have a gun, like, your chances are better off, like, running and having them hit you with but, like, in the moment, you don't know that either. When you're 17, like, that's pretty
Well,
scary, like, you're gonna do what they say because you don't wanna
in
get
our
killed.
fight or flight, like, you don't really know until you're in that
Oh, yeah.
situation how your, like, lizard brain is going to react to that. So,
Yeah.
unless you're, like, hardcore training, like, your entire life pretty much for these types of scenarios, it's easy to sit there like, "Oh, I would have done this and I would have done that," but
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, he grabs her again, and he just keeps hitting her, and she eventually blacks out, and he has her thrown in his car, and he drives off. So, this man was 29-year-old Tony Zappa. So, of course, like I said, it was daylight, so several people did witness this happen, which thankfully they called for help. I'm sure in the
okay.
moment too, they were 2 women, so, like, that's kinda scary. You don't necessarily wanna insert yourself into a situation like that, but and it plus it probably happened so fast that it was like, "Wait, what the hell's happening right now?" Like, but they both did call for help, so good for them. But one of the women said that she could see the front passenger door was open and that the girl was bracing herself, trying not to get in, and that he just kept hitting her over a dozen times, getting her in. The other lady that called said that she heard frightful screaming and turned to look, and she saw a man hitting a girl, and he kept hitting her until he was able to finally push her into a car and drove off. And she said it all just happened so fast that she couldn't process what had happened.
Yeah.
So, the Kearney police officer, Michael Bogard, he arrived quickly after that phone call. And when he arrived, he did find all of Anne's belongings lying on the ground. So, there were mittens, CDs, her purse, which had her ID in it. So, they were at least able to confirm that that's who it was. So, he contacts Anne's parents and told them what had happened. And then her mother, Elaine Sluti, was able to confirm that those belongings did belong to Anne, and they were right next to her car, which was parked right next to where she was taken. So while Anne was shoved in the car, she was on the floorboard. He had her down there, so like nobody could really see her there anyway. And he just started driving north from Kearney. So I don't know distance wise, but at some point she came to and she woke up. She sat up. They had stopped at a gas station in Ainsworth, Nebraska. This was at like 10:15 that night, so at least 3-ish hours probably from the time that she was taken. Um, they stopped there, and he makes her get back down on the floorboard to hide, and he proceeds to use a chain to bind her hands behind her back, and then he used another chain to bind her feet. So he told her to stay down on the floor and be quiet while he went in and asked for directions. I was like, that's kind of bold. Like, if you don't even know where you're going and you're gonna go ask for directions, like, I don't know, you're just not that smart. So
Yeah.
they continue to travel north, and let's see, it says it's about 13 miles from the South Dakota border. Yeah, Springview, Nebraska.
Okay.
So I don't really know how this all happened, but at some point he actually had lost control of the car and he accidentally rolled it into a ditch. So I mean, they obviously weren't hurt. I mean, more than just the initial of her being, tied up and chained and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I mean, the car was obviously still drivable. Like, I'm guessing it just went down in the ditch and he couldn't get it back up. So he decides, he needs help. So he wraps a chain around Anne's wrists and they walk from the Suburban that's down in the ditch to this farmhouse that was nearby. Um, Instead of like actually asking for help, because how are you going to do that when you have a woman chained with you?
Yeah.
He proceeds to cut the phone lines and then he steals the pickup that was parked out front. So he thought he could use this truck to pull his Suburban out of the ditch, but was unable to do that. So instead, he drives into town in this truck, the stolen truck, and he has Anne in the passenger seat this whole time. And then he ends up stealing a front end loader and takes that and uses that to get his Suburban out of the ditch. So while he's doing all of that, Anne was able to remove at least one of the chains on her wrist and she threw it in the ditch. Um, which was good because she was trying to kind of leave a trail.
Yeah.
So it was later discovered by a neighbor who turned it in to the police because they thought that was suspicious. So
Yeah.
Once the Suburban was up and out and moving, they continued to travel north. And so they are going now into South Dakota. So the next day, they stopped out in some random field. I mean, let's be honest, South Dakota is a very, rural area anyway. So I'm sure there's plenty of those around. They are stopped in a field, and Anne had no idea where they even were at this point because she mostly had been like laying down on the floorboard of the Suburban. So she thought that they were like in Wyoming. She had no idea where they even had been because they were just driving for hours straight. Once they pull and do that, he ends up duct taping her hands behind her back, and then he duct tapes her legs together in several places. Then he blindfolds her, and he said he'd make her a deal that if she could get the duct tape off of her, then he would let her go.
I'm
Oh,
sure.
yeah. So she hopped over to this barbed wire fence because they're out in this field, and she's trying to cut the duct tape off, which was smart. I mean, thinking,
Yeah.
which you can't even see because she was blindfolded, but she ends up just cutting herself up a ton. And, then she begged him to take some of the tape off because she said that her shoulders really hurt because they were bound so tight, So he just kept telling her no, and that she whined too much. So he let her struggle for a while, and then he at least takes the duct tape off of her legs. But he's a dumbass because he tries to remove the tape from her wrist as well, like with a key, and that didn't work. So then he tries a glass shard, and then a razor blade, and was unable to still get it off because he had put so much on there and it was so thick that he finally tries to use a lighter to burn it off, which in turn burns her arm naturally,
Yeah.
right? So now she's cut from all the wires and burned. So later that night, so this is probably the next day, around 10 p.m., Tony tells Anne that she needs to just call one of her friends and not her parents. He said, just, call one of your friends and tell them that you're going on a vacation. So they stop, looking.
Yeah.
Okay.
That always works so well.
Right. Which I don't know if I mentioned, I was going to mention this later. There is a Lifetime movie on this, which I watched
Oh.
several years ago. I haven't watched it recently, but I do have to add that James Vanderbeek, Dawson from Dawson's Creek, plays Tony Zappa, which is so funny because he's such a little pansy. And I love Dawson and Dawson's Creek, but he just played such a soft character in that. So it's funny when I saw him in this. And
although I loved when he played himself in Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23.
Yes. I loved that show. And I actually recently saw, this is completely out of left field, I follow him on Instagram because I was a huge diehard Dawson's Creek fan. Anyways, and he just got diagnosed, I want to say, with some rare disease. I'm not sure if it's cancer or not, but that made me really sad because I love him. And he has a ton of kids and whatnot.
I guess
Dawson, yeah.
I haven't paid attention to him in a while, but I was very sad when Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23 got canceled.
I know, man. I remember that show. I just loved the fact that he was in that too. But okay, that's a whole separate story.
Yes.
But I'll give you the deets on the movie at the end too, if you guys want to check it out, because it's kind of fun that it's a Nebraska one that there's a movie on actually.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, he wants her to call the friend. He holds the phone right next to his ear too while she calls because he wants to listen in, which he's just dumb. So instead of calling one of her friends, she just calls her house and she asks to talk to Elaine, which is her mom's name, but he doesn't know any of that.
Right.
But a family friend answered the phone and spoke to her briefly, probably because everyone was over there waiting to figure out what to do to help. But Anne didn't mention anything about going on a vacation. I don't even know exactly what was disclosed, but whatever it was pissed him off, and he hangs up the phone, and he's, threatening her with a gun and all that this whole time. And he tells her to call another friend. So she calls her friend Jessica. Jessica basically just asked where she was, and he hung up the phone. So I was like, I don't know what you thought you were going to get out of this, because none of her friends are going to think she just left. She's 17 years old. She's going to, I think she was a senior in high school. And so she had a month left of school. Why would she do that?
Also, you were very public in your abduction of her.
Right.
So to think that there weren't any witnesses.
Yeah. In the middle of the day. I mean, not the middle of the day, but broad daylight. You know what I mean? People saw, and she's not going to just go on a vacation after she was screaming and thrown into a car. So.
No. Also, just randomly hanging up the phone isn't helping it seem like she's there willingly.
Right. Totally not. Yeah, that's bizarre. So the next morning, which was April 8th, so I guess, this has been 2 days
Couple
now.
days, yeah.
He duct tapes her legs again and her wrists again. This time he even puts duct tape across her eyes. I'm like,
God.
ow. I think about like pulling your eyelashes and eyebrows and
Yeah.
all that. But anyway, he drives her to this remote location. And at this point, they're actually in Montana now. And he proceeds to cut her clothes off with a knife. She begged him not to rape her. This is what the actual document said. And she told him that she was a virgin and begged him not to. And that did not stop him. So this is when he assaults her for the first time. And he threatened her and said that afterwards that he was going to take her to the mountains and rape her 4 times a day, was his words.
Jesus.
So honestly, I'm kind of surprised that it took him that long to assault her. Like, I would assume that happened right away because that seems like that's usually what happens. So it's kind of weird, but it's still horrific nonetheless. So they're in Montana and he takes her to this local cabin. I don't know where they're at. There's just random, cabins that he's apparently just breaking into because I don't think he actually knew anybody in any of these. So this cabin belonged to Mark Wesson. And once they're there, I don't think Mark was present, but Tony steals a rifle that was in the cabin. Then they go to another cabin and break into that cabin. And Tony's upstairs, looking through all the things to ransack. And while he's doing that, Anne finds a phone. So she was smart. So she turns on the water. So the water's running loudly. She turns on the radio and calls 911. And so she told the dispatcher that she was from Nebraska and that she had been kidnapped. And it didn't take long before he realized that she was on the phone. So he flips out, screams at her, ends up taking a bunch of stuff from this cabin that he stole, throws her back in the car and makes her lay down. And he said something to the degree of, I should just shoot you in the head right now for doing that. It's over for you. So now she's like super fearful, but like good for her for at least doing that much. I don't know if it was like because it's off season-ish kind of in April that like a lot of these cabins weren't occupied or what, but by the time the police get there, because it's a pretty remote area, they're obviously gone from that specific cabin. He then heads to Belgrade, Montana now. And once he gets there, he breaks into another home of a woman named Anita Furman. So he ransacks her entire cabin. Then he sexually assaults Anne now for a second time. Then he drags her next door to another guy's house. This guy's name is John Kuhn. So John's actually home at this point. So John opens the door and he sees this large man standing there with this, young woman, and she has this huge black eye. John later is able to identify this man as being Tony Zappa and that the woman was Anne Sluti. So after John saw them, Tony kind of changed his mind and said I don't even know what he said because he obviously was knocking on people's doors and then going in once they weren't answering. So maybe I don't know what his lie was as to why they left.
Sorry, wrong cabin.
Yeah, something to that extent. So they go now to a different place. This house belonged to Sean Swidakis, which I just think that's real crappy that he's breaking into all these places. So he kicks in the front door of this place and he steals a bunch of money that he finds and he steals lingerie. Okay.
Damn.
Right.
Okay.
So then he steals Sean's truck and leaves the Suburban behind. So now they're in this new truck that people aren't really on the lookout for yet. But I'm like, you realize when you steal a vehicle, someone's going to just tell the police that.
Right.
And then they're going to look for that, like put a bolo out.
I'm also curious, like, would the Montana police have, like, contacted the FBI? Because if she's from Nebraska and he's crossed state lines, that's a federal offense.
Yeah, yeah. So we get into that a little bit more too. But so then, they're in this new truck now. And so they drive up to this area, since I'm not familiar with it, but it's like summer cabins, I guess, that are up at Salmon Lake, and this is in Montana. So nobody's there because it's not summer-ish yet. So he forces his way into another cabin, and this is where they stay for the next 2 days. So once they get in there, he removes the phone from the wall. Not only did he smash it, he went ahead and put it in the stove and also burned it. So,
okay.
Like, overkill much? Like,
right.
Okay, bro. So let's see here. Sorry, I got distracted. My kid was texting me, and that's always an alarming thing when it's from school. So Yes, so sorry. So we're all good. We're all good. Okay, so he does that, but then he also goes to the extent of burning all the clothes that he had cut off of Anne recently. So I don't know what she was wearing. I know I mentioned him stealing lingerie. So like in my mind, he's making her wear that shit. So
Yeah, gross.
he burns everything he can to get rid of any sort of evidence. And then he
Except he's
assaults
been
her.
leaving his fingerprints
Right.
everywhere.
Like he's obviously not that smart. And like when you don't, like your car goes into the ditch and people have already seen that car, maybe you should have just left that anyway. Like, I mean, just once again, not how to
Yeah.
get away with things. But so after he gets rid of some evidence, he assaults her again. And it was obvious he was trying to get rid of evidence, and she's aware of this. And so when he wasn't looking, she hid underwear that she had had on that was stained with his semen, yeah, in a kitchen trash can though, hoping that it would be found, which was
Yeah.
super smart because not only did she leave behind like something helpful, but his DNA. Like,
Yes.
yeah. So
Because if his fingerprints aren't in the system, I don't know, did they have his DNA on file for something else, you know?
right, right. And like I don't even know if I mentioned it at any point. He's originally from Minnesota. I don't actually even know where he was living at the time, if he was even living in Nebraska or if that was a random place too. So like who knows at this point if they're even familiar with him in Nebraska or so I mean there's so many different things to go along with that. But she also hid two different notes that she wanted to just put somewhere in case the owners came back and found them. So she wrote inside one paperback book, and she wrote inside Anne Sluti 41001 help. I love my mom, dad, and brother, which makes me sad because she obviously,
Didn't
like,
expect
yeah, she thought
necessarily,
she was
like,
going
she
to
was
die.
planning. Yeah.
So she put the book back on a shelf with the other books that were on this bookcase, and they did end up finding that later. The other note she wrote just said, Anne Sluti was here, April 2001. She put that behind the kitchen window seal, which was also found later as well. So she was very smart. So after they leave this cabin, they continue to travel further northwest in Montana. So they only stopped twice during this whole time. So they stopped once to get gas. And then another time they stopped so he could buy ammunition for that rifle that he had stolen. So before he went into that store, instead of just leaving her like in the car chained up and everything, he went as far as chaining her, wrist, feet, taping her mouth, and he put her in the trunk of the car.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, yes. So it's April 10th. They arrive in Flathead Lake, which is near Rollins, Montana, and break into another cabin. That's like his thing. And I don't know how he keeps getting lucky that nobody's like at any of these cabins. So,
Right.
whatever. So later that night, while they're there at this cabin, he's in the bathroom and Anne turns on the TV and she sees now that the police are aware of this kidnapping because she wasn't really sure, at this
Yeah.
point what happened. And she saw that they were searching for the Suburban and that they also were looking for this new car that he had stolen from that house. So that gave her hope. So then the next day, when he saw the news, he freaks out. And so he tells her that, if we're going to get caught, I might as well have some fun with it. So he asks her to take off her clothes and she refused to. So then he got more violent this time and he assaulted her again. So during all of this time, obviously her friends and family were pleading for her return. Her parents were even on Good Morning America, and her dad, Don, he had said to the person that had taken their daughter, he said, "You've been with Anne for 5 days now. You know what a wonderful person she is. We need her home with us, please." So they were pleading because I can't imagine, having that happen, but like this long spree too of not knowing and not catching him or having any idea where they went. So
Yeah.
then on April 11th, a neighbor noticed the stolen vehicle that he had it was backed up, parked in front of that cabin. So they called the sheriff's office a little after 5 p.m. and they don't arrive until 5:40, which why did it take that long unless it was like that far away from like, I don't know,
Yeah.
town if it's out there, but I'm like, are you serious? Because I don't know what led him on to know that they were coming then, because he ends up hiding it in a garage nearby. Like he breaks into a different place, hides it in a garage. And so by the time that the officers get there, they're not sure exactly where he is, but they still know that he's up there. So they're blocking all the roads that led to all of the cabins. So then he barricades the doors in the cabin they're in with all the furniture he can find. And they end up finding out or figuring out which cabin they're hidden in. So they surround this cabin and he refused to surrender. And an 8-hour standoff went down. And he threatened to torture and kill her if she made any noise, which I'm like, they obviously know she's in there anyway.
Right.
So it's stupid. And he was begging her to call 911 and to call her family and to call his mother and wife. Interesting, right? That's the only mention I saw of that. But he wanted her to call all those people and tell them that she had not been kidnapped. She was gone on a vacation. He was wrongly accused, this and that. So 8 hours of this garbage goes on. And eventually he ends up surrendering at 3:15 a.m. on April 12th. So Anne is taken to the ER and she's treated there. She had a really bad black eye, which included a conjunctival. How do you even say that word? Yeah. Hemorrhage.
Go ahead.
She was treated for the bad burn on her arm and all the cuts on her wrists. There was also considerable bruising around her wrists and legs where she had been bound multiple times. They were able to confirm too that she had been sexually assaulted, and they also confirmed that she had been a virgin prior to this, which I think that's terrible that they shared that. And I think, and I know I'm sharing it right now, but I think it's already out there, but I think it's one of those things that it's like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, what a humiliating thing to have shared your personal business with all of that.
Also, I would like to know how you confirm that, because if it's the whole thing with the hymen, like, it's been proven that that's not a guarantee that a woman hasn't had sex, because if she was in sports or was tamped, like, there's a bunch of ways for that to be a thing.
Yeah, and if she's been assaulted multiple times anyway by him, there could, I mean, I just thought that was a weird thing. And so I wanted to share that because then I thought, like, this poor girl who's already had the worst things happen to her now has like, the entire world hearing all.
But it's also one of those things too. It's like, does it make it worse? Like, either way, she was sexually assaulted, and whether she hadn't been a virgin or not, like, it's still not okay. It's still a terrible thing.
Right.
So whether she was a virgin prior or not shouldn't have any bearing on the fact that she's a victim and that was a horrible situation.
Right. Like, it doesn't change the fact that it still happened and it would have been terrible whether she was or wasn't.
Yeah.
But yeah. So after all that kind of goes down, they confirm that Tony Zappa was actually Anthony Stephen Wright. So I don't know if he had a fake ID. I don't know how they got that information to begin with. Like, if that's what, like, the plates were registered to. I have no idea. So, which is interesting. So he goes to trial and he actually gets sentenced to life in prison and 7 years for abducting Anne from the Kearney Mall in April of 2001. So he also was required to make restitution totaling up to $40,000.
To all the places he broke into and stuff?
I'm sure. Yeah, because he's a crazy guy. And I mean, I don't know if there was any prior history. And like, I guess this case is still over 20 years old. So that's probably why it was hard to find a lot of, like, I found the information basically of after, like, when she was rescued, like, this is what happened and this is what he's getting charged with. But there wasn't a lot of background on, like, his upbringing as to why he did this, you know.
If this was an escalate. I mean, there's no way this was like his first offense, whether or not he was caught.
Right.
Prior, but there's no way he hadn't done some terrible shit in his past.
Right.
This isn't like, it was still sloppy, but this is an escalation. This isn't a, I can't imagine this being a first time, like, thing.
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously there's some mental illness here too, because during his trial, at one point, they handcuffed him and removed him and he had to watch it through just a monitor because he was like screaming at the judge. He called the judge Captain Kangaroo. He was screaming that his attorneys were ineffective and that the state of Nebraska was biased. So they're like, sir, goodbye. So one thing that was nice though for Anne was she testified, and thankfully the day that she testified, he wasn't in there. He had to watch it through the monitor. So that was easier for her because, you know, they talked about how emotional, obviously, she was. But then when he was brought back a couple days later into the trial, he apologized and said it was because of the meds they had him on or something, which I'm like, I don't know. You're not helping your case, you know? So like I said, Anne testified during the trial. She described everything in detail. And of course, the defense attorney, they're like grilling her as to why she didn't, call out to strangers at places, or the guy who they knocked on his door and he answered the door. Why didn't you say anything then? She said she was scared that he was going to hurt her more or her family. And she said he had like 3 weapons at a time on him. And
Yeah.
so they were like trying to say that this was consensual and that she wanted to
Ew.
sleep with him. I'm like, that is grasping
Gross.
at straws and disgusting.
Like, I understand that you have to, like, everyone gets an attorney and you have to defend some people, but let's not,
Right.
like, you can have better defenses that don't make you such disgusting people.
Right. Especially like this is a minor, at the time of the crime she was. And so that's even
Let's
worse.
not
Like
victim
gross.
blame. And, like, if anything, try to go the mental instability route or something,
Right.
Don't go blaming a 17-year-old of being like, why didn't you ask for help? She was
Right.
17 and terrified and
No
you'd already
shit.
beaten the shit out of her.
Right. Yeah. Why would you? I mean, it's just like any other case. It's like, right, people are scared.
Yeah.
And I don't know if any of the stuff that was in the movie, they always dramatize some of the stuff.
For sure.
But like, they show her like talking to him. And I think she was smart enough that she was trying to kind of get close to him at a personal level so she could, he would trust her and she could escape and stuff. And they show that in the movie a little bit. And I read a couple things about that. It didn't go into great detail, but it does sound like she was smart enough that she was really like trying to
like humanize herself to him.
Exactly. And so, that's kind of the gist of that. So like, her family, they said that time heals all wounds really rings true for them, obviously. And it's really neat because like her dad even said it's just a scar. It's a part of living. I guess we all go through things at some point in time. So I was like, at least they
to that extent, though.
I know,
like,
no shit.
That's
So she went on to graduate from Rose Pullman Institute of Technology and lives, I don't know, she still does. The information I found back when this article I was using came out said that she was living in Indiana, where she was working as an engineer, which is pretty sweet. So her mom said it's a career that fits her matter-of-fact personality, that she's very factual and doesn't like to repeat herself. And there's, if there's a right way to do things, then that's how she's going to do it. So, and they said how she's always just been concerned about others and she doesn't say mean things about people or anything. And she's just a nice person and not wishy-washy. Anne's logic and strength is part of what saved her life, her dad said. He said she just thought it out to make it so he wouldn't get frustrated with her and still have the hope that somebody was going to find her. Even when they did find her, though, it wasn't over yet. Her mom said, I thought then that we physically have her, but I hope that we have her mentally too, because you never know. And it said that she was good. I'm not sure. I'm assuming she would go to therapy at some point then.
Yeah.
They said that thankfully she was able to like maintain friendships and relationships. They said that, her kidnapping didn't really affect the person that she became. Like, she didn't go down a deep hole. She didn't let that define her. So she's not wasting any time thinking about what happened to her. And her parents said the same thing when they were asked if they ever think about him, and they said never. So they said, they had lots of emotions that happened at the time, but why live to be a hateful, bitter person? So I was like, good. I'm glad they could move on from that. And one cool thing too was that Anne was worried that people would only think of her as a victim, and she did not want that. She said she just wants to live her life. So I was like, you know what? Good for her, because something like that could completely destroy you.
Well, yeah, and understandably so,
yeah.
too.
So that, I was like, okay, I want to do like a survival story because some of them are just so dark. And I remember hearing about this when it happened because I was in high school. And I remember hearing that a girl had been like taken from the mall, and it was like, what? And so, and I remember when I went to college in Kearney for one semester and I hated it. But I remember being, even at that point, like at the mall there, thinking like, this is where that girl got taken, and thinking like, this is so crazy. This is like a small town. And I can't believe someone would even do that here where there's not. I mean, it's not a big city, and I just remember thinking like how scary that was back then. So when I was trying to think of different cases to do, this one popped up because I had seen a different Lifetime movie that was on Hulu or something. And I was like, oh, I forgot about the movie with James Vanderbeek about the Nebraska girls. So I don't know if it's still on Hulu. It's called Taken in Broad Daylight. And this movie came out in 2009. So it was a Lifetime one, so it's, got all the cheesy things. But the fact that it's James Vanderbeek that plays Tony Zappa is kind of crazy because,
That is. It's
yeah,
weird to think of him as like a bad guy.
I know. I mean, he did a good job. I was like, he must have been desperate for something if he's doing that. But that's the story of Anne Sluti, and I'm glad that it has a happy ending. However, it could have been a lot worse. I think if it went on longer, I don't know how long he would have kept her alive. And it's terrible that he sexually assaulted her, but I was surprised that it was not significantly more,
Yeah.
So it sounds like she was smart and was able to keep herself alive. And I mean, even leaving like trails of evidence behind, like what kid back in the day, like at that age would know to do that kind of thing, So she was
Yeah.
obviously very smart, but yeah, so that is the story from Nebraska this week. I guess it did go into South Dakota a little bit and Montana, which is
Montana.
not technically the heartland, but kind of
That
feels like it
still.
is. Yeah.
It's fine.
So yeah, that's that, guys.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And that's kind of nice. Like, we have now 2 cases in a row that'll be survivor stories. So that's
Oh yeah,
nice.
yep.
Especially because my next one is not. And I will give you all a heads up now that it is just, it's heavy. My next one will be pretty heavy. So
Yeah.
prepare. So it's nice to have those ones that, I mean, obviously this one's still heavy as
Right.
well. But there's always that little bit of like, I don't know, when you know that
These all don't have a bad ending.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that she didn't let this completely destroy her life. She still moved forward and did something. And I just, yeah. So
Totally agree. That's why I was like, the couple other ones were pretty horrific that I was going to do, and which we'll just do those at some other point. Why?
yeah,
But it's whatever. So that's that for this week. So yeah, stay tuned for Cassie's next week, which
yes.
whatever that date is, I don't even know.
I'd have to look ahead. I don't even know. Our next one's coming out on the I don't even know now. The 20 no,
Yeah, because this one
the
will come out
29th.
what, the
Yeah.
5th? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I
So
know
yeah,
I'm so
one
confused
tomorrow and
because
then the next. Yep.
like this will be February's episode now, but it's January still. It's
I
weird
know.
that we're
It is.
ahead, Shannon. I don't know
Yeah,
what to
it
do with
is
myself.
weird. And I just said how long my case was, and I just looked at the time and I was like, oh, I talk really, really fast because it wasn't even a full hour. So you're welcome, people.
I mean, it's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, let us know if you know anything about that case or any of the other cases, of course, that we cover, or if you have any cases that you would like us to cover. Yeah.
You
Reach
know
out.
the drill. Like, rate, review, share, follow, all those things on all of the places. TikTok's still a thing, so we're still on there. And
Yeah. We're there for now.
YouTube, we're there. All the stuff is linked in the show
Yeah.
notes. So
Yeah.
we appreciate it. Any sharing or comments and stuff like that just kind of helps people see our podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So that's that.
Yeah. Until next time, stay Heartland kind.
But Darkland wary.